Hello and welcome to, and I can hardly believe I'm saying this, the 102nd edition of Heart of Poland. And I'm here with Katarzyna Person from the Jewish Historical Institute, or the Emmanuel Ringulblum Jewish Historical Institute, as I think the full name is. Hello, Kasia.
Hello. Thank
Now,
you for having
thank you. I'm so delighted you're here. And it just turns out, actually, by uncanny coincidence, or by canny coincidence, that you know one of our previous guests. You went to university with Daniel Tillis,
me. Yes,
who
we
was
were in the same year together.
so
So hello,
Daniel.
Daniel.
Hello, Daniel. If you're, of course, he's watching. He watches Heart of Poland. Kasia, I've been looking forward to speaking to the JHA for some time because I've always wanted to tell the story of Emmanuel Ringulblum. I wanted to do films about him and his work. It's an amazing story, and I think it's one that still, despite it all, isn't particularly well known. And I'm not talking about Poland, just generally, people don't tend to realize it's a story of sacrifice. There's just so many things going on. Today we're going to talk about the work of an amazing guy, Emmanuel Ringulblum, and a whole group of amazing people who decided, in the midst of the sheer horror of the Second World War and the terror and the destruction and the chaos and the degradation and the discrimination and hatred, that they were going to sit down and document it and take that documentation and hide it, so that even if they did not survive, at least their word would survive. Can you tell us about this story? Try and give our viewers the overall background. Who was Emmanuel Ringulblum? Let's maybe start with him.
That is a great story, and the story of Ringulblum himself on its own is enough to be fascinating. He was born in 1900, so the beginning of the century, in Buchach in Galicia, which was a very important place and a place where many important influential people were born at that point. So it was sort of on the border of secular and religious Jewish life. You got both secular and religious Jewish education. So he was a man who was under many influences from the very, very beginning. And I think he understood very well the complexity of not only Jewish life in Poland, but in general, the complexity of communal life, social life. And that was very important for him as a historian later on. So he was born there. Then he went to Nowy Sącz, where he got his secondary education. And then he went to Warsaw. And in Warsaw, he got his PhD in history. He wanted to study medicine first. He didn't get in because of numerous classes, which was already starting. So as a Jew, he could not get in, but he could get into history department, and he became a historian of Jewish history in Warsaw, actually. He wrote his PhD on that. And then he couldn't get a job at university, again being Jewish, and got a job as a history teacher in high school. And that school itself is a fascinating story because we have so many really interesting little.
I know. I'm desperate to jump in with something I know about his story, but then I know it's going to take us off in a different direction. But feel free to take us through his story, because it's a great metaphor for all the things that are about to happen with his work, and it takes him there. So feel free to take us down your version of Ringulblum's life, and any alleyway that you want to take us, because it really is, ladies and gentlemen, quite phenomenal.
So that school where he starts teaching is called Yehudia. It's a Jewish school for girls in Warsaw, which really is important if you're interested in gender history and history of women, of Jewish women into Poland, into Warsaw. This is fascinating because it's a school which creates a whole generation of very strong, very powerful young Jewish women, and very well educated. And he teaches there, but he's not very happy. That's what we know for sure. He doesn't seem to be doing particularly well as a teacher in a school for middle-class girls. His real passion is with the people, that's what he says, and that's really what his life is. He wants something bigger. He's from the very beginning involved in Left Coalition, so he's a Jewish leftist, Zionist. He's very much involved in Yiddish language as the language of the people. And he really is fulfilling himself, working in the leftist movements, working with the people, working with the working class. He starts organizing educational circles for the working class youth and adults as well. He starts organizing libraries for workers. He basically works with the people and works with Yiddish language. He becomes very involved in the Yiddish Scientific Institute in Vilna, and then the branch in Warsaw, where they work on this new kind of Jewish history, which is something which is very much linked to what he's doing. So this sort of writing history from below rather than from up, with collecting sources among people who may not be normally represented in Jewish history, not Jewish history, any history writing.
And,
So
you get, I mean, if you haven't, ladies and gentlemen, got the sense of just what a kind of fertile, almost feverish time and period this is for Poland's Jewish population. There's a lot going on, and the political scene is very diverse and complex. You've already mentioned that he himself was barred from certain positions. Let's maybe talk about slightly wider context here. How many Jews are there in Poland, and what is their broad brushstrokes? What does their life look like in 1930s Poland?
This is fascinating because this is a very strong, very powerful Jewish community at that period, especially in Warsaw, which becomes really fertile in terms of Jewish politics, of various nationalistic Jewish politics, but also of people who are becoming assimilated, because we have those two movements happening at the same time. On one hand, we have this very strong movement towards cultivating Jewish identity, Yiddish, and Jewish politics, which is also linked to Zionism and possible immigration to Palestine. And on the other hand, you have people who are educated in Polish schools and who are stronger and stronger becoming quote unquote assimilated. But we're using sort of quote unquote because it's not the top assimilation, from Western Europe, because they still very much remain not really fully assimilated into Polish communal life, because of course of growing anti-Semitism, which is happening at the same time.
So is a way of looking at it through the prism of the languages. What language you chose to speak at home would say quite a lot about where you were politically and what your opinion would be on where Polish Jews should be in the future, quite literally, physically.
Absolutely, and it's very important for Ringulblum, of course, because he's very much working in Yiddish and he's writing in Yiddish. Yiddish is the language which he chooses, which he sees as the future language of the Jewish community in Poland, which he thinks should be now treated no longer as a jargon, but actually as a proper language in which you can write poetry, you could write books, you can do scholarship as well. But then on the other hand, of course, there is a growing number of people who are educated in Polish, and Polish is the natural way in which they express themselves. When it comes to professional lives, especially, the Polish literature is the literature they grow into, Polish culture is the culture they grow into. So you have all those really incredible mixing influences. And that's what I said about him being born in Bucharest in Galicia, and where everything is mixing and everything is sort of influencing each other. That's also what's happening to him. And that's where he's, I think, really feeling alive in those... and that's what will also be happening in Warsaw Ghetto once he sets up Oyneg Shabbes and the underground archive. The need to understand the complexity of it all.
Well, what I find fascinating is, of course, you've got the documents in all these different languages and people from so many. It's just unbelievable when you start to look into the details. So many different walks of life, stratas of society. It's really quite incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go slowly through this story because it's worth telling over the space of this time that we have together. Kasia, before we go any further with Emmanuel Ringulblum, let's go back to you. What sparked your interest in this story and your work at the Institute? How did you arrive at that point?
Well, I was doing my PhD in history in London, and I became really interested in the history of what you were saying about, actually, of people, of assimilated Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, again, quote unquote, assimilated or acculturated. So people who had strong Polish identity, for whatever reason, whether they chose it or whether they were born like this. Also people who were baptized, who were either baptized at birth, were brought up as Catholics, or people who chose to be baptized for whatever reason. And how they found themselves in the Warsaw Ghetto and how they felt once they were there. So how did it feel to be in the Warsaw Ghetto with an identity which was very much imposed on them, which was imposed on them by the Nazi law, even though they might have considered themselves primarily Polish.
And how long have you been working at the JHI?
Long time. 10 years, maybe almost 10 years, yes, since my PhD.
And you're researching, you're looking at what's your work generally involved, so our viewer can get to know you.
I work on the Ringulblum archive, actually. We're doing a full edition of the Ringulblum archive, which is a fantastic undertaking, which has been now going on for almost 20 years, actually. We're just finishing the Polish edition. So the idea is to publish every document from the Ringulblum archive, We're finishing the Polish edition, so we're doing everything in Polish translation. Because as you said, there are different languages. Half of it roughly is in Polish and half in Yiddish. It's also Hebrew and German. So we're publishing everything as a scholarly edition in Polish, and now we study the English edition. We already have 3 volumes, and we're translating everything into English from the original. So we have translators working for us who translate from Yiddish into English, and of course from Polish into English as well. So,
Core blimey, ladies and gentlemen, this is fascinating. Well, we'll get to why there's so much material in the case of the milk can somewhere lying in Warsaw. We hope that maybe one day we'll give you even more work. That would be not going to happen.
But
okay.
It's a nice thought.
Well, it's a nice thought, and we'll save that for a teaser. But we're getting ahead of ourselves because I'm presuming our viewers have some knowledge of this story, because we haven't got Emmanuel Ringulblum to the point where, very sadly, the situation for Warsaw's Polish Jews and Polish Jews in Poland becomes significantly worse. So we're in this febrile, fertile, creative. When I read about Polish history, when it comes to Polish Jews, I hear a lot of people like Ringulblum at that stage. He doesn't seem to have been remarkable in any particular way. Active politically, socially, lots of meetings, very earnest in that sense, educated. Do you get that sense as well that he was not remarkable, or is that perhaps a bit unfair on my side?
He was a good combination of things. I don't think he was particularly remarkable. I mean, he was a good historian by all means. He was a great organizer, but because he was everything together, it all worked in the right time and place.
Yeah.
So all those qualities of him being fantastic at organizing things, being fantastic at outreach, being fantastic at working with people from different walks of life. So here there was middle-class girls in his middle school he was teaching. And then you have workmen who he teaches in the afternoons or in the evenings.
And he's also this guy with this sort of natural optimism that keeps him going where a lot of other people would have just given up, and plenty of people did.
He's doing lots, absolutely, because he's working all this time. He's teaching, he's working politically in different political aspects, and he's also doing his own research. So he's writing books and he's writing articles. So he's doing so much, and it really. So he is a very driven individual. I think he is quite optimistic, as you said.
No, I feel I've been a bit harsh to Emmanuel Ringulblum, because everything he's about to do is going to be quite incredible. Yeah. So let's get to the Second World War. Where is Ringulblum, and what does the outbreak of the war look like for Poland's Jews and for Warsaw's Jews in particular?
He's in Switzerland, actually. When the war starts, he's on a Zionist Congress in Switzerland, and he decides to come back.
Wow.
He says that his place is with his people. That's how he actually writes about it. We know, of course, also that his family is in Poland, in Warsaw. His son and his wife are both in Warsaw. So it's natural for him to go back in a way. But of course, we also know of many people who didn't. People who chose to stay where they were and then try to get their families out of Poland. And these are the tragic stories because we know the vast majority of them never managed to do it. So we have those people who are this whole issue and the fascinating and tragic topic of watching what's happening in Poland to the Polish Jewish community from outside, and watching your own family as well.
Then, so he's back in Warsaw.
Mm-hmm.
Is he living in the area that then became part of the ghetto, or is he somewhere in the quote Aryan side?
He's there, and that's the area that's very heavily bombarded during the siege of Warsaw. And that's important. That's also quite often forgotten about to what extent Warsaw is already destroyed in September 1939, and especially the Jewish part of it.
Yes, and if you want to find out more about that, you can always watch a previous episode of Heart of Poland, where we go into detail with the fantastic historian Grzegorz on that subject. So he's inside the area, and then life for Warsaw's Jews just get this feeling it just gets steadily worse and worse and worse, and there's a little bit of boiled frog syndrome where people don't want to believe, or they're just hoping for the best, and there's this creeping horrible sense of it just driving towards what eventually becomes this ghetto, and then the ghetto starts to creep and creep and creep even more to the horrible climax. Talk to us about what that walling in looked like.
What is basically happening is that the Jewish community in Warsaw is being gradually subjected to Nazi laws, which are stronger and stronger and more oppressive. At the same time, there's a gap which is starting to grow between Polish and Jewish community, which was, of course, there before the war, but now it's clear because they have different laws applied to them. they are both affected indifferently. And that leads also in, for example, in March 1940 of the so-called Easter pogrom in Warsaw, where there's quite a lot of violence very strong violence against Jews. So there are also these aspects, but also, yes, people are getting more and more impoverished. There's also a large number of refugees coming into Warsaw, which is important. And it's important for Ringulblum himself, because he worked with refugees just before the war started. He was working in Zbąszyń, which is another fascinating story, camp on the Polish-German border, which housed Polish Jews living in Germany who were expelled from Germany. And he was working there. And then once he gets back to Poland, to Warsaw, he starts getting very heavily involved in organizing social life and Jewish social life and Jewish communal life in Warsaw. So he organizes so-called soup kitchens, which are like soup kitchens, where people get them one bowl of soup a day. He starts organizing also various aspects of self-help so that people can help each other within the community. And that's very important. So they don't have to be only reliant on outside help, but they can actually do things to help each other. And they set up something called the house committees, which is like a social help unit, which is limited to one building, but one building really like a kamienica with hundreds of people, especially in overcrowded ghetto later on. But they sort of help each other because it's understandable and understood that they know best what they need. So they get money from the outside from Jewish self-help, and then they distribute it and also organize different ways of getting money from other places or helping those who are most impoverished in their building, organizing, for example, some sort of help for children, organizing different other types of aid within the building, because this is what he really believes in, I think, and this is where.
Does Ringulblum try and escape at any point? I mean, there's quite a long period where you can move relatively freely, not safely, but freely around Warsaw at least. He was connected. Did he not want to try and flee the city or get maybe to the Soviet border, which was obviously there until 1941?
No, he doesn't, and he has very strong views about those who do. He does think that they're traitors and their place is where they should be, especially people who are leaders of the community before the war. And this is something that's I don't like very much about Ringulblum, but I think it's part of his personality. He does have very, very strong views on certain things. If you read his writings, he, for example, absolutely condemns dowry, even though from today's point of view, when we look at them, this is a natural thing to do. This is the natural way of saving your family, not just yourself, but others around you as well. But he, for example, has very strict views about how people should act. And this is also fascinating when we look at the Ringulblum archive, because we see him sort of surrounding himself with people he completely disagrees with.
Yes.
People that have completely different views. And him, who is really a man of very clear convictions, still manages to sort of be open-minded enough or understand the mission of the archive enough to bring in people from very, very different walks of life.
It's fascinating because you see the good and the bad, and he was, politically speaking, he was it seems like the historian's training he had gave him that level of rigorousness and impartiality. It seemed to play a crucial role. Everything just fits together so remarkably. It's extraordinary. So he's I think the ghettos sealed in late 1940. We both agreed we weren't going to do too many precise dates today.
Yes, in November 1940.
November, yes, thank you. So up until then, there was relatively free movement. And then from the beginning of the ghetto, Jews under certain circumstances could come out for work, but again, the screw gets turned and turned and turned. Conditions get worse and worse, and the optimists of 39 start turning into people who are giving up and despairing, and all this enormous range of reactions and emotions and debates and horror, and it's all being captured by Ringulblum because he decides to document it all so that some of this will survive, at least the memory. To talk to us about that process.
So basically, Ringulblum starts by writing his own diary, which is a natural thing. People do that, and many of those who are in Warsaw at that point start writing their own diaries. So he writes this diary, which is very, it's not really a personal diary. He just writes what's happening around him. He's also listening to gossips, and he's writing down different rumors circulating around Warsaw. He's taking information from newspapers. He's basically trying to write sort of chronicle more than a diary of what's happening. But of course, he soon realized this is not enough. and that the time is different, that things are happening which never happened before. And he sets up Oyneg Shabbes, so the joy of Sabbath, because they meet on Saturday, a group of people with an aim of working together to writing, as he says, our history. And that's really what it's all about, is that this is meant to be our history. This is not Polish history, this is not German history, this is not Jewish history as written by Poles, this is not Jewish history as written by Germans. This is a Jewish history as written by Jews and for Jews, and for the future Jewish historians as well. So that the memory survives, and so that after the war, and they believe very strongly there will be after the war, there will be something the future historian, and then maybe even him, because he may think about himself that way, will have all those sources on the basis of which he can write the history of the persecution of Jews in Warsaw, then go right into Poland as well.
Over time, he starts to bring together. It's quite a big operation for given the resources and everything else that's going on. It starts with him. How many people are involved in this project over time?
We don't really know, because this is an underground project, first of all. So we know of the key group of 20 odd people, 30 people who are around him, who know what's happening. But then there's a lot of people who are contributing for the project without even knowing that, or maybe suspecting it, but not fully knowing about it. There are people whose names we don't know because they write, of course, all of it is anonymous as well. And then how it deciphered another part of it. But yes, so we don't really know how many people are in it. We know who he brings in, and we know that in order to write this full, complete story of Jewish community during the war and the complexity of Jewish social life during the war and sociological changes, demographic changes happening in the ghetto, he brings people from every walk of life.
And that brings me out, if you don't mind, I'd like to immediately recommend a book which I think, if you're interested in the story, is a great way to get to know it. There's been other academic works and books and things, but this is a book I read a few years ago, and it's just fantastic. I'm presuming you've met Mr.
Polish as well.
Okay, so there you go. I haven't got the book in Polish, but I'm reading Polish with my thing. I wondered if you don't mind, Kasia, I'm going to read a couple of portions from, some. I mean, there's not a huge amount of comedy here, but actually, it's one of the interesting things is that there is comedy in life, and it's the full range of human emotions. It's a remarkably complex, but there's nothing black and white about what you'll find in here. It's an extraordinary piece of work. I want to quote from some work which is included by Cecilia Swapakova. You obviously, you're shaking your head. You know exactly who she is, because she was interviewing women from various socioeconomic groups. And her description of the ghetto streets for me was fascinating. It's page 244 of this book. It's 10 o'clock, a hot sunny day. The Jewish street pulsates with the intense rhythms of its anemic life. People push, hurry, shove, and stand close against the wall. A mix of faces, voices, smiles. Rolls, fresh, tasty, white, and cheap. Morena, your eyes glow like 2 stars. Warsaw Zeitung Reich. Cheap cigarettes, cheap cigarettes. Dear good people, have mercy on a mother of 3 orphans. Oh my God, catch the thief. I have a hairdresser's appointment. Thank God I earned some money this week. They're behind on paying wages in the office. How will I support my family? It's such a beautiful spring. You so want to live. We have to survive. It's 10 o'clock, and the Jewish street is full of voices of need and of hope. Even reading that, it brings you very close, because I think a lot of people will see the Warsaw Ghetto and then immediately think of the film footage that the Nazis took. And you see various things in that. That's how they understand the story of the Warsaw Ghetto in the large part. Let's break it down. Maybe looking at it all now, you're talking about tens of thousands of individual documents, or several thousand individual documents.
35,000 pages.
How many? Sorry.
35,000 pages of documents.
So guys, think about this for a second. During the Second World War, this group of people with very little support managed to get 35,000 pages of material and documentation about what was going on to Polish Jews. It's just utterly gobstopping. I mean, it's incredible.
And it's fascinating material as well, because the work which just quoted, Cecilia Swapakova, is a fantastic example of that. First of all, because she's a woman, and there are many women involved in the outcome. which on its own is fascinating. Then secondly, because she's a pre-war intellectual and someone definitely from the pre-war elite who writes this study of women in the ghetto. She's actually asked by Ringulblum to write it because he decided that a woman should be writing the story of women. That's sort of natural today, but at that point, definitely not, because it's 1940s. And what she does is she interviews women from all walks of life, as we said. But by all walks of life, I mean starting from women who have PhDs and are pre-war intellectuals and working as librarians in the ghetto. So women of definitely high social standing and from the intellectual elite. And then she goes to different women. And one of the women she interviews, for example, is a woman who works as a prostitute, who is a waitress in the ghetto, and then ends up working as a prostitute. And this study of her is just the most sensitive and fascinating study that you can imagine. It's something that we would write today. I think it's done up to, I won't say today's standards because it's not there any higher, but like how we understand writing about such topics today, as opposed to people living in the 1940s. Because she, for example, asked about how her family feels about it, which is, and for example, she says about her father, who she's feeding. I mean, she's bringing food home from her work. But she says, what does your father do? How does he feel about the neighbors? How is he reacting to it? Like things which are really which were taboo for many, many years after the war as well. And that's also an issue, of course, with Ringulblum Archive and with research on it for many years after the war, is that the topics they preached and looked into were not only taboo in terms of Jewish history, but were taboo in general when it comes to how we show experience of the Second World War, not just Jewish experience. That's one thing, but in general experience of the war in any community.
Yes, there are painful moments and terrible choices being made, literally line by line, in much of what you see here. Like I said, there's also laughter. There's lots of documentation about cabarets and shows and things, and the people in the street who would make up funny rhymes and become famous and things. So we've talked a bit about. Try and take us through like the full gamut of the material here. What's I mean, is it? It's hard if we could spend half an hour talking just about that. But what issues are they covering? What are they trying to collect here? How is it organized? And God alone, how is all this stuff stored? All this huge amount of material.
So it starts quite easily. I mean, quite simply, they began by gathering documents. I think the first thought is that we have to gather documents which will, as I said, serve the future historians. So it's basically anything you can find that's related to social life and to every aspect of social life. That's something that he brings in from, of course, working in IWA, in the Jewish Scientific Institute before the war. The need to sort of get sources on the grassroots level as well. So for example, they bring in children's school compositions, which are especially written for the archive. They have one of the collaborators who works in a primary school, and she asks her students to write an essay on what happened to my family during the war. What's my family life looking like during the war? And they write that, and she brings it on into the archive, it's a fascinating sort of collection of documents, soon coming out in English from the children in the ghettos. And then we have also documents coming from the Jewish Council, so official documents, official German documents. We have posters being taken off the walls and put in the archive, photographs, also diaries, personal documents, diaries which are written especially for the archive as well, not only those which are collected, but also those where Ringulblum is asking his collaborators to specifically write a diary, keep a diary, so it can be put in the archive. Letters, basically anything you can think of, which serves as a source. But again, we're thinking about serves as a source in today's understanding of writing history, but not necessarily in 1940s understanding of writing history. Because you have oral as well. Sorry.
That's fine. Who's paying for all of this? I mean, there's people instead of working are going out and conducting field surveys, I guess you could call them. And how is this getting financed? Because otherwise, these people are in a fight for their life like everybody else.
There are a few wealthy individuals who were wealthy before the war, who have the money, who still have some access to the pre-war funds, who are financing it. So these are people who are actually involved in the archive, individual donors who are financing it. It's also financed by the AJDC, so by the Joint Distribution Commission from America as well, from American Jewish community. So these are the main sources of financing it. But those people are putting their whole lives into it as well. We have members of the team who are dying of hunger during their work, and who are documenting it as they do that, as they die. We have people who are extremely impoverished. A lot of people also combine working in the archive with their everyday life work. So, for example, Peretz Opportunity, who's a postman in the Warsaw Ghetto, is working, documents his life in a absolutely fascinating essays on his everyday work in the ghetto, on the poorest streets of ghetto where he's working, how he's distributing letters and what he sees and how people react. Is absolutely fascinating.
The urge to record is clearly something that people in these situations strongly feel, because you've got all sorts of documents being shoved into the ground and stuffed in bottles all over the place. Is there anything quite like this archive in any other ghetto in Poland, or occupied Poland, or anywhere else?
There are similar archives, but nothing. I mean, similar collection of it's not similar, but there is an archive in Białystok, but it's not in any way similar in the sense that it's the same amount of documents. Especially what's special about Ringulblum archive is that it's not just, it starts as I said, about collecting documents, but then it moves into much more scientific type of work. Because in the end of 1941, they decided to do what's called a 2.5-year project, which is actually writing academic studies of life in the ghetto. This is partly, of course, because it's getting longer and longer. The end of the war is on side, and they start to actually process the documents they have gathered, and they divide the whole life in the ghetto into smaller topics. Cecilia Sopakowa's study on women is one of such topics. But
Yes.
children and other many other.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think it brings me to another part of the book I'll read. I'm just reading excerpts from the archives from the source of this, Kasia, with your permission. Here it is. It's not something that's easy to read, and I'm constantly, I have a huge amount of admiration for the historians and people who have to work on this material day by day, because I just don't think I could do it. But we can also be grateful for the fact that we have those people, and indeed that people went to this work to do this. So this is nurse Dora Weinerman, who recorded the following scene. On the night of March the 3rd, 1941, Weinerman and her assistant were deluged with work. They had to wash, feed, and give injections to 50 children. Suddenly the telephone rang. 10 new children had arrived, but there were no beds, blankets, or clothing. The hospital had no heat. Each bed already contained 2 children, and Weinerman was told to add a 3rd child to each bed. The 10 children had just arrived from a small town, and their families had been dumped in the ghetto. They all had measles. After checking them in, she inspected all the beds. In one 3 small beds, 3 small children lay in a pile of feces. All 3 were crying. And here's a direct quote. So this is directly from her. A swollen 5-year-old is lying in the corridor. He is dying of hunger. He came to the hospital yesterday. 2 swollen eyes, hands, and feet like little pumpkins. We did all the tests. Kidneys, heart trouble, but it's neither. The child barely moves his lips and asks for a piece of bread. I give him something to eat. Maybe he'll swallow. But no, his throat is swollen and nothing goes down. It's too late. The doctor asks, "Have you eaten something at home?" No. Do you want to eat now? Yes. After a few minutes, for the last time, he says, "A piece of bread." And with those words, he dies.
This is what this archive is really about, is that it records for us voices of people like this 5-year-old boy who are nowhere to be found as well. Because I'm almost certain that the name of this boy does not appear anywhere, or he's gone. There's nothing. The community archives are gone because everything's destroyed. He left nothing else. He died at that point, and the only place where this boy is preserved and where the memory of the boy is preserved is in this sentence. That's all that's left of this boy is this one sentence. And it's not just him. It's thousands of other names which are written down during a archive. Is that this is such an important commemorative project as well. Is that they write down names of refugees like him. So people who come into the Warsaw Ghetto from small ghettos with nothing on them, because everything's stolen from them or taken away. They don't have much to take anyway to begin with. And they arrive in the ghetto and they die within a week or 2 weeks of typhus or they die of other illnesses or of hunger. And Ringulblum actually makes an effort, and that's to go and interview those people and speak to those people. And for that, their names are preserved, and the stories are preserved. So in that sense, it's an incredibly important archive, and incredibly, I think it's very important that we have it and that we read it and that we remember those people as well. People would remember us.
Yeah, you put it beautifully. And if someone's more interested in the story other than reading the book Who Will Write Our History, can they go to the Jewish Historical Institute and find out more and come and meet you guys?
Absolutely. We have an exhibition on Ringulblum Archive, which is fascinating and which actually shows original documents from the archive as well, which is a very rare occurrence. And it tells the story of the archive, it tells stories of people who are in it, and we do tours both in Polish and English. So absolutely, and we're starting a new exhibition soon on the Warsaw Ghetto, also based on documents from the Ringulblum Archive.
Highly recommend it, guys. I was there in 2010, I think, for the first time. So very interested in this story. Well, what you've got is this remarkable collection. We've mentioned it several times, and you've got the stories of all these individuals going through this hugely traumatic experience, and it's very moving. I mean, like you just said, there's plenty more like that little boy dying in horrific circumstances, and I get the sense that there's something quite extraordinary about Ringulblum's dedication to this cause, and it feels that hunger didn't beat the desire to record this. It's also a testament to human resilience, and the immense power of humans to overcome frailty and hunger and destitution. So they're collecting all this material, but how are they making it safe? Because all it would take would be one hungry person, maybe trying just to get any food or get some sugar or whatever to turn them in. So what safety net has Ringulblum got in place here to keep this remarkable archive safe?
Well, it's all done in secret, as I said. It's all underground. Many of those who are involved in the project don't know about others. The group that's around Ringulblum is very small. Those people actually know how the project is working. It's very small. But also, I think that's the key. Also, the archive is hidden. They decide to hide it. Do we get to the point of hiding? But they did decide to hide it in 1942 and early 1943.
So that's as the ghetto is slowly becoming, quite literally suffocated. So it gets smaller and smaller, and people get crammed in, and you typhoid epidemics. It's really unpleasant place to be. And then, of course, in the summer, summer of 42, transports.
Yes, that's the deportation action. Yes, deportation action from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka, and the death of the vast majority of people involved in the archive.
And you get this remarkable story of people escaping from the trains, somehow making it back to Warsaw and contributing to this archive and telling other people this is not deportation in the East. You're not going to a work camp. They're coming to exterminate you, and people not believing that. And again, you're hearing these moral challenges of people saying it's going to be okay. Don't panic. They've got rid of the sick and the infirm, but we'll be okay. So they decide to hide it. Do they stop working or do they carry on?
That's a very good question. They actually, those information are coming early already. And from the beginning of 1942, the archive changes again from this sort of the place of scientific research into a center of spreading information about the fate of Jews in Poland. So they write their own bulletins, which are written in Polish for the Polish underground, in Yiddish for the Yiddish underground. For the Jewish underground, they also take into London at some point. So they are trying to inform the world, as they say, scream the truth to the world, tell the world what's happening. As information about the first death camps being set up and mass murders coming closer and closer to Warsaw are being recorded. And then the summer of 42, we have the Great Deportation Action in July, and that's when Ringulblum decides to hide the archive. So in the August of 1942, in the beginning, the first part of the archive is hidden. The second part, which contains what we were talking about, so which contains information also from Treblinka, is hidden in the beginning of 1943.
And then, of course, the Ghetto uprising in 1943. So, what happens to Ringulblum, and what happens to his archive?
Ringulblum is in hiding. Well, he has quite a complicated story, like they all do, but he ends up in hiding in at Górnicka Ochota, under a greenhouse. There's this very large underground bunker called Bunker Krysia, which houses over 30 people. It's a fascinating, very well organized hideout. He's there with his family, and the hideout is deconspiring in some deconspiring, and they shot. He dies in March 1943, and sorry, 1944, and basically everybody else who's among the key employees of the archive is murdered at some point,
including the Poles who were hiding him.
In that sense, yes, including the Poles who were hiding him as well, and one person, and well, 3 of closest collaborators pretty much survived. So from the internal circle of the archive, 3 people survived, and luckily one of them is Katarzyna, who is the secretary of the archive, and who's also one of the very, very few people who knows where the archive is hidden. So that is, again, a miracle.
Yeah, exactly. Let's just pause this. So just think about this. You've just gone through years and years of all this effort, and these archives are buried in cans and milk, old-fashioned milk bottles, I suppose, the big ones, the milk containers, and they're buried in various, a couple of locations. The problem is that, of course, everybody who knows about where they are is at risk of death every second of the day. So there's no guarantee that all of this work will get out, and it's a sheer miracle that it did. So this chap Vasa, yes, I remember as right, yeah,
Vasa, yes.
Vasa. His story is also remarkable, because I remember he escaped, and then there was a shootout or something. He goes on his own life and death mission, and but by a stroke of a miracle manages to survive the war. Let's talk about him just for a second.
Well, they all do. All of those who survive by miracle, and maybe it's not the right one, but they survive. It's a miracle that they survived, and he actually survives with his wife as well, with Bloma. He's from the very beginning working as secretary of Ringulblum, so secretary of the archive. He actually knows probably more about the archive than Ringulblum does, because he's the one, and this is really important, who actually also writes down the names. He knows who wrote what, which is crucial once it comes into the archive is taken out, and he actually manages to write the first catalogue of the archives.
So he comes back to Warsaw. He
Yes.
comes back to Warsaw in 1947. The first canisters are uncovered. Is that right?
No, in 1946 actually.
46. Okay.
There is, and this is again a fascinating part of the archive. If you think about it, what's happening also in 1946, that this small group of survivors, against everything that's happening, in incredible poverty, Warsaw which is demolished completely, and especially the former ghetto area, managed to convince a number of donors who contribute, because this is a lot of money. The archives are hidden underground, plus you have lots of rubble on top, and nobody really knows where it is exactly. So this is a very expensive undertaking, and conceptually very difficult as well. And they managed to convince people that where money should be put at that point is into digging out some documents with everything that's happening. And they do that. They find the archive. They find the first part in 1946, and they don't find the second. The second part is found again by chance, let's call it chance, in December 1950, during building works carried out in the same building, and workers were there again, find those milk churns and decide not to throw them away, but they actually open them, see what's there, and actually bring it to the right authorities for them to be preserved. And the second part is actually in a better state than the first part. That's another, despite being underground for 4 years longer, because it's as you said, in milk churns, as opposed to metal boxes where the first part is, where the water gets in. The milk churns are, hermetically sealed, and they're better preserved.
There you go. See, Kasia speaks good English because she knows words that I don't, and I was born in England as a native speaker. So she said churn. I had container in my head, but you obviously know what you're talking about. Well, I want to, as we come to the end of this remarkable story. I mean, we haven't touched the surface, as Kasia will readily attest to you. She's been spending a lot of time. I want to just read actually from, I think it's the last will and testaments of the three who buried the Kashev documents at Novolipki 68. Because those are also very moving. They're burying this stuff, and they know that for a good reason, which is the Nazis are just around the corner in every sense. And there's three chaps. They've been sealed off from the rest of the operation. They haven't been involved. No one knows who they are, so it's hermetically sealed, as it were. But they're putting in their own messages, their own personal messages. This is the story of David Graeber. This is his, as a 19-year-old, testimony. What we were unable to cry and shriek out to the world, we buried in the ground. I would love to see the moment in which the great treasure will be dug up and scream the truth at the world, so the world may know all. So the ones who did not live through it may be glad, and we may feel like veterans with medals on our chest. We would be the fathers, the teachers, and educators of the future. But no, we shall certainly not live to see it. And therefore, I will write my last will. May the treasure fall into good hands. May it last into better times. May it alarm and alert the world to what happened in the 20th century. We may now die in peace. We fulfilled our mission. May history attest for us. Well, I think, again, not even remarkable in the sense of this archive. There are hundreds of thousands of those extraordinary pieces of work. We can be very grateful not only for everyone contributing to the archive, but of course to everything you guys do as well. So, Kasia, if their interest has been piqued, if they maybe didn't know this story, what should they do next? Where can they find out more and go beyond just a simple Google and Wikipedia?
Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw at Tłomackie near Plac Bankowy has a fantastic exhibition. As I said, it's both in Polish and in English. So as both is fully accessible in both languages and everything's translated. So please come and see it. And our full edition is also coming out in a fantastic bookstore in the Jewish Historical Institute as well, including documents from the archive as well in English edition. And
Kasia, we briefly, teasingly talked about this sadly missing third milk churn. Is it like the gold train of this whole process, or is it something? What are the chances that someone might one day dig up?
If it ever existed, I think that's the big question. Is whether it actually ever existed, and we don't know that. There was talk of it, and there was search carried out for it as well at the location where the Chinese embassy is placed right now, which made search a bit more difficult. But nothing was found, so we don't really know that. It would be fantastic. I mean, of course. But I think we have to cut a loss of that.
Well, congratulations to all of you guys in your work as well. It's been fascinating having you take us on this canter and gallop through the life story of Emmanuel Ringulblum, who sealed his place in history along with his canisters and many other people's lives as well. I've always been interested in this story, and even in a 50-minute interview, we still can only touch the surface of what it's all about. So there's plenty out there. Go and see the Jewish Historical Institute. They're great people. Kasia as well. And it's been just fantastic talking to you about this, Kasia. I've long waited for this discussion with you.
Thank you very much.
Any last thoughts now on the work of Emmanuel Ringulblum, the work of everybody involved in the Oyneg Shabbes story, and indeed the story of Warsaw's Jews?
It was fantastic. It was groundbreaking. It was extremely modern. And thanks to this, we really can now carry out modern research, I think, on the Warsaw Ghetto. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's what it's all about. So thank you very much, Kasia. We're coming up at 50 minutes on the hour. It's been a longer edition of Heart of Poland than previous ones. Just remember, what we are doing at Heart of Poland is going on the impossible mission to uncover the heart of Poland. It's not always pretty. It's very often tragic. I find it highly inspiring. It teaches me to be a better person. And I think there's a lot we can draw today from the work of Emmanuel Ringulblum and his team. in the past. And of course, more than anything else, to give voice and name to those who became voiceless and nameless through no choice of their own. They deserve all the respect they can get. So if you are interested in the tragic and inspiring story of Polish history, then there's a lot on offer, not just at the Jewish Historical Institute, but also Heart of Poland, because we've talked to pretty much every single major English-speaking or author or historian or historian working in the English language on Polish history. When I first came to Poland 10 years ago, there was nothing quite like Heart of Poland, but now there is. You can go back on the firstnews.com, the premier English language website and resource for Poland. You're more than likely to check out interviews, for example, with Adam Zamoyski, who talks about Polish and Polish-Jewish relations as well, at a spicy time on that particular topic. And we've got plenty more to offer, including stories with Alexander Ritchie, Roger Morehouse, among others. So I do encourage you to check out Heart of Poland wherever you can find it. Let's give a small, in internet terms nowadays, I guess it's thumbs up. I would say a small round of applause. Thank you, Kasia, for joining us as well. Maybe we'll come back to you and talk to you as the story develops, because it is, of course, developing. As you say, work is ongoing. So that's it. I'll see you again for another episode of Heart of Poland.